Hey everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between February 16th and February 22nd. First up, I read The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, and I gave this book 3 stars. In this book, we follow a young girl named Vasya. She lives with her dad, stepmom, and brother, though we start from the beginning of her life through her growing up into her teenage years. She lives in a place that honors the household spirits. Vasya's stepmom is very religious and forbids her family from honoring those spirits. The rest of the town ends up following as the head of the local church encourages them to stop as well. Then weird things start happening, and Vasya realizes this is due to them not honoring the household spirits and must find a way to set things right. This is in spite of the danger that she will encounter if she does so. I'm not quite sure how to feel about this book, hence why it kind of got 3 stars. I really liked the atmosphere of this book, but there were like time jumps and I did enjoy that, and there was a bit of a, how to put this without spoilers. It almost seemed like there were times when we felt like we would be getting to the main plot of the story and the author would intentionally move that plot further away, and I didn't enjoy that. And yet the writing kept me intrigued. Like, I enjoyed the writing style, so I wanted to continue reading, even if I was getting frustrated with the lack of progress we were making with the plot. I'm not sure that I'm going to continue on with this series. If you've read this series, let me know what you think about whether I should continue on in the series in the comment section below. I'd love to get your feedback since this book was all right for me. Next up, I read The Storm Beyond the Tides by Jonathan Cullen, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Ellie and Carl meet on the brink of World War II. Ellie has lived on Monk's Island, Maine, her entire life, while Carl, a German, is there with his family, hoping to secure visas that will allow them to stay. During their time together, Ellie and Carl fall in love. Unfortunately, the visas don't come through, and Carl is forced to go back to Germany, though he promises Ellie he will find a way to return to her. Then war breaks out, and it seems like the dream they both have of Carl returning is squashed. During the war, both of their lives change dramatically, and they both wonder if they will ever see each other again. So I thought this book had a lot of promise. I really enjoyed the start to this book, getting to see Ellie and Carl meet and kind of how they kind of fell in love with each other. And I was intrigued by the premise that he would have to go back to Germany and try to figure out how to get back to her. It was after that that things kind of felt rushed. Like, there were a lot of time jumps, and I just feel like there could have been more to the story than what we got. I also wasn't sure how I felt about the end of the book, so that definitely lowered the rating for me. Yet this is another book I think I just wish we had gotten more from, and the parts that I wanted more from were kind of rushed through, so it didn't work for me as well as I hoped it would. Next up, I read Root Magic by Eden Royce, and I gave this book 4.25 stars. Jez and her brother Jay are finally old enough to learn root magic, the folk magic that has been a part of their family for ages. Their uncle begins to teach them after their grandmother's death. He needs their help to protect their family. One of the local police won't stop threatening their family, and there is also a supernatural threat hanging over their heads. With everything going on, Jez must learn as much as she can if she's going to protect her family. So I really enjoyed this book. I really like the atmosphere in this book. I thought that Eden Royce did a great job making you feel like you were really there with Jez and bringing that world to life. I thought it was really interesting to see the kind of supernatural threat that they were dealing with, but also the very real life threat of this police officer who wouldn't leave them alone. Mainly because this is taking place in 1963 during integration. And so you have this white police officer who's kind of harassing her family. And it is very interesting seeing how her and her family deal with these two very different but very real threats. As far as I know, this is just a standalone, but I definitely wouldn't mind if we got to spend more time with Jez and her family, as I really enjoyed this book in this world, and I definitely enjoyed Eden Royce's writing and will be reading more by them. Next up, I read The Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie, and I gave this book 3 stars. This is one of the books in the Hercule Poirot series. In this book, Poirot is contacted via letter by a man asking for his help. When Poirot arrives at the man's house, he finds out that the man has been murdered. He was stabbed to death and flung in a freshly dug grave while his wife was bound and gagged in their room. On the surface, it looks like a break-in gone wrong, but Poirot feels there's more to it than that, so he decides to investigate. I really enjoyed the kind of mystery aspect of this novel. However, it is told from Hastings' point of view. I think he's the same person that the first book was told from. I'm not positive, though. And I could not stand him. He really, really ruined this book for me. Like I said, I enjoyed the mystery aspect, which is why this is getting 3 stars. But he was so annoying. He kept, like, interrupting the flow of the novel for me, and I just really could have done without his thoughts and insights into this case. And yeah, it just really drug down my enjoyment of this novel. The mystery part, however, was fantastic, and I had no idea who did it. Though maybe that is because of Hastings' musings and how distracted he was throughout the book. Next up, I read Sofias War by Avi, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book is set during the Revolutionary War, and we follow Sophia, whose brother is caught while working as a rebel against the British Army. Horrified by his treatment and the treatment of his fellow prisoners, this changes her. When she gets a chance to spy for the rebel army, she takes it. This leads to her getting information about a rebel spy for the British Army, and she must find a way to get this information to the right people and to get them to believe her. I really enjoyed this novel. I think this is the first historical fiction I've read that is set during the Revolutionary War, so it had quite a different feel to all of the other historical fiction novels I've read. It is also Sophia telling us her story. Like, there are several times she addresses us, the reader, and I liked the way she included that. Like, it's her writing down what happened to her. I really enjoyed getting to see how the war affected her life and how it kind of changed her world and how she grew up over the course of this novel, because I think she's like 12 when her brother is captured, but when she begins spying, she's like 16, I think. And so it is really interesting to see how what happened with her brother affects the rest of her life. I really enjoyed the writing in this novel. Like, it really drew me into the story, and once I picked it up, I didn't want to put it down. I also listened to this on audiobook, and I really enjoyed the audiobook as well. So if you want to give the audiobook a try, I highly recommend it. Next up, I read 12 Slaves of Christmas by Jacqueline Frost, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. Holly White has returned to her family home after her fiancé called off their Christmas Eve wedding. Her family owns a Christmas tree farm, which is super busy as it's Christmas time. Her time there is just what she needed until a murder occurs on her parents' farm with one of the signs used to identify the trees. This throws suspicion on the staff, including Holly's father, who was seen arguing with the victim shortly before her death. Holly knows her father couldn't have committed this murder, so she starts to poke around to drum up another suspect for the murder. I felt this book, despite being like a kind of murder mystery, had some nice Christmassy vibes. Again, that sounds weird in a murder mystery, but it definitely made me wish I had read this at Christmas time. I really liked getting to see how Holly kind of went about gathering information. She is familiar with the town as she grew up there, but she's kind of back for the first time in a while. So, like, she has that familiarity, but also a bit of unknown because she's been gone for a while. I also thought it was interesting to see how the fact that her wedding had been called off affected her and affected how people treated her. I did manage to figure out who did it, but only at the very end, like right before Holly managed to put it together. So I definitely enjoyed the mystery aspect of this novel, and I will definitely be giving the next book in the series a go. Next up, I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book, our protagonist falls in love with and marries Maxim de Winter. His wife, Rebecca, died 10 months ago. Our protagonist, who is never named in the book, is an orphan and was working as a lady's maid, so when she gets to Manderley, Maxim's family home, she doesn't quite know how to be the lady of the house. This book was quite different, but in a very good way. This was another book that I felt was very atmospheric. Like, I really felt like I was at Manderley, and I thought that Daphne du Maurier did a very good job at making you feel like you were there. I thought it was an interesting touch to never learn our protagonist's name, as in some ways, at least for me, it almost made me feel like I could step into her shoes and put myself in her place. Like, I was the protagonist and I was the one that was walking around Manderley. This book was really atmospheric, and the mystery of kind of what happened to Rebecca, because you don't know how his wife died at first, and you kind of find that out over the course of the story, is quite interesting. And it is also interesting, I went back when I finished and looked at the beginning of the book, because there are things that are said at the beginning of the book that make a lot more sense once you get to the end. And so I definitely think this would be an interesting book to reread once you know the whole story. So I can definitely see myself doing that at some point down the road. I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I'm really glad that I read it. Next up, I read Across the Dark Water by Jennifer Lynn Alvarez, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book, we follow Rocky, who is working as a stable groom for the riders of the Sanguine Army. The Sanguine Army is made up of tamed Pegasi. The Pegasi, along with their riders, protect the clan from the dangers that lurk in the forest surrounding their land. We also follow Echo Frost, who is a wild Pegasi who has traveled to Rocky's land with other wild Pegasi to escape an evil Pegasi who has taken over their land. Once there, she encounters Rocky and his people, who want to capture her and her herd, as Pegasi are valuable and wild Pegasi were thought not to exist anymore. Rocky and his people are stunned to see the wild Pegasi, while Echo Frost and her herd are stunned to encounter Rocky and his people. It was quite interesting getting to have chapters told from Echo Frost's point of view and seeing how she felt about Rocky and his people and what she and her herd knew about them. It was also interesting getting to see her interact with the tame Pegasi, as they had a completely different view of Rocky and his people. I really enjoyed getting to see Rocky and how he felt about the way his people were treating this herd of wild Pegasi. I also thought that this book ended in the worst place possible, and I definitely need to get my hands on the second book because it ends on a massive cliffhanger. So keep that in mind if you pick this up. You might want to have book 2 on tap, because there is a massive cliffhanger at the end of this book. Like, literally, it feels like it ends in the middle of the story. I'm going to be quite interested to see what happens in book 2, because obviously the author has decided there's going to be more to this cliffhanger than would make sense to tack on at the end of this book. So I'm quite curious to see how she manages to kind of put a whole book together based on the way this book ends. And lastly, I read The Story Collector by Kristen O'Donnell Tubb, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Viviani lives in the New York Public Library with her family. She tells a story at school about how the library is haunted and is challenged by her new classmate, Merritt. She decides to prank Merritt in order to convince her the library could be haunted. Things get out of hand, though, and the prank ends up being not so funny. This leaves Viviani to figure out whether the library is really haunted or if something else is going on. So this book is inspired by the true story of a girl who actually did live at the New York City Public Library, which I thought was quite interesting because I didn't realize that that was a thing that had ever happened. I really like the library aspect of it, and getting to imagine what it would be like as a kid to live in a library. As somebody who loves books, I think that would have been really, really cool. It was interesting to see Viviani kind of deal with her feelings, because she didn't like that this new girl was calling her out and basically saying she was a liar, because in her mind, a story could be true. If there's nothing to prove it's not true, then it's possible. I felt like the mystery was very, very obvious, though. At least for me as an adult. Maybe as a middle grader, I wouldn't have noticed it as much, but for me, I pretty much pegged what was going to happen very early on in the book, but the atmosphere of the book kind of drew me in, and I quite enjoyed that part of the book, so I definitely plan to check out the next book in the series. So these are some of the books I've read recently. What is a book you've read recently? If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a kite emoji in the comment section below, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!